My husband's breakfast of love wasn't just eggs and bacon, it served as my death sentence. This morning, sickness isn't a sign of weakness. It is the final alarm from an intuition I chose to ignore. 1 hour after vomiting that meal, I realized the truth. I wasn't just nurturing a life. I was raising a demon in my own bedroom every single night. My name is Alara Vance. I am 34 years old, and for the past decade, I have made a living as an independent auditor. My world is built on the cold, hard logic of balance sheets and the detection of subtle discrepancies that others miss. But as I woke up this morning in our high-rise apartment overlooking the shimmering waters of Aurelia Bay, my internal compass was spinning. The familiar, wretched wave of nausea that had defined my 3rd month of pregnancy hit me before I could even open my eyes. It was a heavy, sinking feeling in my gut, a physical manifestation of a life growing inside me, or so I told myself. The bedroom door creaked open, and Julian stepped in, framed by the golden morning light. He looked every bit the powerful executive he was, the golden boy and chief executive officer of Nexus Prime. He was holding a silver tray with a flourish, a perfect smile plastered across his handsome face. He looked like a man in a home security commercial, radiating safety and success. "Good morning." "Beautiful," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. He set the tray down on my lap with a gentle touch. "I made you something special. Eggs Benedict with extra hollandaise, just the way you like it. You need to keep your strength up." I looked down at the plate. The eggs were poached to perfection, the yellow sauce glistening under the lamp. But as the steam hit my face, my professional instincts, the ones that had spent 10 years sniffing out fraud, screamed a warning. There was a scent hidden beneath the rich, buttery aroma of the butter and lemon. It was sharp, a metallic and chemical tang that reminded me more of a laboratory than a kitchen. It was a tiny, discordant note in a perfect symphony. I hesitated, my hand trembling slightly as I picked up the fork. Julian sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes locked on mine. There was a strange, manic energy in his gaze, an eagerness that felt performative. "Julian." "I don't think I can eat this," I whispered, the nausea rising in my throat. The smell, it's making my head spin. He reached out and squeezed my hand, his grip just a fraction too tight. "You have to try, Ilara. Do it for the baby. It is for the health of our child. Please. Just one bite for me." His insistence felt like a physical weight. I took a small bite, the rich sauce coating my tongue. That chemical aftertaste was unmistakable now, bitter and cold. My stomach recoiled instantly. It wasn't just the pregnancy. My body was rejecting this food with a violence I had never felt before. I dropped the fork and scrambled out of bed, barely making it to the bathroom before I collapsed over the porcelain. I heaved until my ribs ached, the sour taste of betrayal and bile burning my throat. In the bedroom, I heard Julian's phone ring a sharp, demanding tone. "I have to take this," I heard him mutter. "Stay there, Ilara, don't move." I heard the heavy thud of his footsteps as he hurried out of the room. He was in such a rush that I heard the distinct click of his study door closing. But I also heard the hum of his personal laptop still sitting on the nightstand. He had been working on it before he brought the tray in, and in his haste to answer the call, he had forgotten to close the lid. I wiped my mouth with a cold towel, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Every auditor knows that the biggest mistakes happen when people are in a hurry. I walked back into the bedroom, my eyes drawn to the glowing screen of his laptop. An email was open, a draft that had just received a fresh notification. The sender was Bianca Sterling, his private secretary. I knew her as a sharp, ambitious woman, but the words on the screen were anything but professional. Was the special breakfast delivered? The message read, "Don't let her suspect a thing before she signs the property authorization papers this morning. We are so close." The room went cold. The nausea didn't just fade, it froze into a hard, crystalline clarity. I looked back at the half-eaten eggs on the tray. My husband wasn't feeding me. He was preparing me for a liquidation. I wasn't his wife anymore. In his eyes, I was just a liability that needed to be audited out of existence. My mind did not spiral into a panic. Instead, it defaulted to the cold, sterile logic of a forensic audit. Panic is for the unprepared, and despite the bile still burning my throat, I was a professional. I reached for my phone, my fingers steady as I began to photograph the screen of Julian's laptop. I scrolled through the hidden chat history between him and Bianca Sterling. Every image was a digital footprint of a betrayal so calculated it made my skin crawl. I captured it all: the plans for the special meals, the legal jargon regarding my shares, and the nauseating pet names. I looked at the tracking software synced to his car. Julian was not at the Nexus Prime headquarters. The GPS placed him at a luxury service apartment at the Azure Heights. My chest tightened as I recognized the address. It was a property I had signed for and paid for using my personal account every single month for the last year. I had believed it was a corporate landing pad for international consultants. I was funding the very roof over his infidelity. I didn't throw the breakfast away. I walked to the kitchen and carefully scraped the congealed eggs and the chemical-scented sauce into a sterile glass jar. I had a friend, Marcus, who ran a private toxicology lab across town. He owed me a favor from an audit I performed for him 3 years ago. This plate of food was no longer a meal. It was a piece of physical evidence. I sat at my desk and opened my encrypted laptop. I bypassed the superficial layers of our joint accounts and went straight for the ledger of Julian's investment diversions. My eyes scanned the rows of numbers, and there it was. Over the last 6 months, Julian had been siphoning large sums of money, nearly $400,000, into a private equity fund standing in Bianca's name. He wasn't just leaving me. He was stripping the bone before the body was even cold. My phone vibrated in my hand. It was Julian. I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to become thin, brittle, and defeated. "Julian," I whispered, letting a fake sob catch in my throat. "I am so sick. I napped for a bit, but I threw up everything. I feel so weak. Julian, I can barely stand up. I think I need to see a doctor." There was no warmth in his voice, only a sharp, clipped authority that made my blood run cold. "Ilara, listen to me," he said, and I could hear the impatience behind his words. "You need to stay put. You are just dehydrated. You need to rest and not go anywhere. I already spoke to my lawyer. He will be at the house at 2 o'clock this afternoon with the share authorization papers for the Nexus Prime merger. It is just a formality. But we need it done today. Just stay in bed. Do you hear me? I hear you." I breathed, letting my voice trail off into a weak, pathetic sound. "I'll be here. I'm just so tired." "Good," he replied before hanging up without a single word of affection. I stared at the black screen of my phone. The mask had slipped, and for the first time in 7 years, I saw the man I had married for who he truly was. Julian was a predator, but he had made a fatal mistake. He had forgotten that I spent my entire career finding people exactly like him. Bianca Sterling thought she was the one pulling the strings, the architect of my downfall. She was about to learn that when you try to audit a professional, you had better make sure your own books are clean. I stood up, the nausea replaced by a freezing, focused rage. The lawyer was coming at 2. I had 5 hours to turn this house into a cage. The silence in this apartment used to feel like luxury, but now it felt like the suffocating weight of a burial shroud. I moved through the hallway, my footsteps echoing against the Italian marble. Every piece of art on the walls and every designer chair suddenly felt like a trophy taken from a battlefield I hadn't even known I was standing on. I retreated to the guest suite where Julian's mother, Diana, stayed during her frequent visits. She had always been the image of a perfect matriarch, wrapping me in silk-clad hugs and calling me the daughter she never had. I began to strip the room, my fingers acting with the precision of a woman looking for a hidden debt. Behind a loose mahogany panel in the back of the walk-in closet, I found it. It was a small, tattered leather journal with Diana's initials embossed in faded gold. I sat on the floor, the cold rising through my bones as I flipped through the pages from 20 years ago. The handwriting was elegant, but the words were venomous. Richard is becoming a burden. One entry read, "He complains of the fatigue, yet he signed the final transfer of the estate this morning. The doctors are baffled by his sudden decline. They call it mysterious exhaustion. I call it necessary progress." I felt a phantom chill crawl across my skin. Julian's father had died of a heart condition when Julian was only 14. The world saw a grieving widow. This book saw a silent executioner. My mind raced back to the last 3 months. Since the day I announced my pregnancy, Diana had been here every evening. I could see her in the kitchen, her eyes soft and motherly as she stirred those thick, green smoothies. "Drink up, Alara, dear," she would whisper, pressing the cold glass into my hands. "It is an old family recipe for the baby. You look so very tired." I dropped the journal as if it had turned into a viper. I wasn't just sick. I was being erased. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and twist, morphing into the silhouettes of women who had walked these halls before me, women whose voices had been silenced by the same care I was receiving. I could almost hear them whispering in the vents, a choir of ghosts warning me that the floor beneath me was made of bones. My phone buzzed on the floor, the vibration jarring me back to the present. It was a secure link from Marcus. I opened the file, my eyes darting across the chemical symbols. Preliminary findings: high concentrations of a digitalis derivative. The report stated, "It is a cardiac glycoside. In low, sustained doses, it induces extreme nausea, blurred vision, and eventual heart failure. It is easily mistaken for severe pregnancy complications or preeclampsia." I leaned my head against the cold wall, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. They are actually doing it," I whispered to the empty room. "Mother and son. They are killing us both for a percentage of a company." A sudden, fierce heat flared in my chest, burning away the cold fear. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. I looked pale, my eyes sunken and dark. But the auditor was still there. Julian and Diana saw a frightened girl, a weak vessel they could drain and discard. They didn't realize they had invited a professional investigator into their inner sanctum. "You think I am the prey," I said, my voice low and dangerous as I stared at my own tired eyes. "But you forgot. You forgot who keeps the books. I didn't need to run." If I ran, they would find a way to spin the narrative, to make me look like a mentally unstable wife who abandoned her family. No, I would stay. I would sit at their table and drink their medicine while I quietly dismantled every lie they had ever told. I would audit their lives until there was nothing left but the debt they owed to the truth. The game was no longer about survival. It was about a total, scorched earth foreclosure. The doorbell rang at precisely 11 o'clock. I smoothed my silk robe, making sure I looked every bit the frail, crumbling housewife they wanted me to be. When I opened the door, Bianca Sterling stood there, a vision of corporate elegance and predatory grace. She smiled, but the warmth didn't reach her eyes. My gaze dropped to the bag on her arm, an Hermes Birkin in classic gold leather. Julian had told me he spent $25,000 on that exact bag for his mother's 62nd birthday last month. Seeing it on Bianca's shoulder felt like a physical slap, but I kept my face neutral, a mask of weary gratitude. "Bianca, thank you so much for coming," I whispered, leaning against the doorframe as if I might collapse. "I know you are so busy at Nexus Prime, but with the baby shower coming up and my head being so foggy, I just didn't know who else to turn to. Oh, "Elara, don't be silly," she said, her voice dripping with a fake, honeyed sympathy as she brushed past me into the foyer. "Julian is so worried about you. He asked me to check in and see if I could help you organize, well, everything." She walked through my living room with the air of an appraiser, her eyes lingering on the original oil paintings and the crystal vases. She wasn't a guest, she was an heir checking on her future estate. We sat at the kitchen island, and I laid out a stack of folders. "The lawyers mentioned these property authorization papers," I said, rubbing my temples. "Julian wants them signed by 2 o'clock, but I keep reading the same paragraph over and over. My brain is just... it is like mush." "Bianca, could you look at the clauses regarding the Aurelia Bay title?" Bianca reached out, her manicured nails clicking against the paper. As she leaned in, she reached across the marble counter and placed a hand directly on my pregnant belly. The gesture was supposed to be intimate, but I felt her fingers press in with a terrifying, possessive strength. It was a victory lap. "You just need to trust Julian, honey," she murmured, her eyes locked on mine. "He only wants to take the pressure off you. Once you sign these, you won't have to worry about a single thing anymore." I forced a small, trembling smile. "I know. He is so wonderful. It is just..." With the news from Switzerland this morning, I feel even more overwhelmed. Bianca's hand stilled on my stomach, her eyes sharpened, the predator catching a new scent. "Switzerland. What news?" I lowered my voice, acting as if I were sharing a dangerous secret. "My father's estate. The legal freeze on his offshore accounts was finally lifted yesterday. It is, well, it is a lot. Nearly $5 million in a private trust. The lawyers say I need to incorporate it into my personal holdings before the end of the month." I watched the hunger ignite in her eyes. $5 million. I could see her mental calculator spinning, adding that figure to the spoils she and Julian intended to strip from me. If they killed me now, that money might disappear back into the Swiss legal system. They needed me alive, and more importantly, they needed me to transfer that imaginary wealth into an account they could reach. $5 million, she breathed, her composure slipping for a fraction of a second. That is quite a responsibility. Elara, you really should let Julian handle the paperwork for that too. Maybe you're right. I sighed. I'm just so tired. I think I need to lie down for a moment. After I ushered her out, promising to have the papers ready, I collapsed onto the sofa. My heart was hammering against my ribs. But the true blow came 10 minutes later. My phone buzzed with a call from my younger sister. "Sloan." I answered, expecting a voice of comfort. Instead, I heard the muffled sounds of a distant conversation. Sloan must have pocket-dialed me. I stayed silent, my blood turning to ice as I recognized the sharp, aristocratic tones of my mother-in-law. "Diana, must be patient." "Sloan." Diana was saying, "Once Elara is out of the picture, Julian will ensure your gambling debts are wiped clean. You'll get your 10% share of the insurance, just as we agreed." "I know. Diana." Sloane's voice came through, clear and cold, devoid of any sisterly love. "But she is taking so long. Why can't we just speed things up? I need that money now." I stared at the ceiling, the phone trembling in my hand. My husband, his mistress, my mother-in-law, and now my own flesh and blood. They were all standing in a circle, knives drawn, waiting for me to stop breathing so they could feast. I didn't cry. The time for tears had ended with the breakfast Julian had served me. I closed my eyes and began to rewrite the ledger of my life. If they wanted a piece of me, I would make sure it was the piece that choked them to death. The drive to my mother-in-law's sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city felt like a journey into the mouth of a cold, hungry beast. Every mile I traveled away from Aurelia Bay stripped another layer of my former life away. I was no longer just a wife or an auditor. I was a ghost haunting the edges of my own murder plot. I pulled up to Diana's villa, a limestone monstrosity that bled arrogance. I had the spare key she gave me back when she pretended to love me. I entered the house with the silence of a shadow. Diana was in the garden, her voice drifting through the open French doors. I moved quickly to the sunroom, my hands steady as I reached for the tall, ornate Ming vase she prized above all else. I tucked a small, high-frequency listening device beneath the rim, hidden by the silk lilies. Then, I retreated to my car parked a block away, sliding my headset on as the rain began to drum against the roof. The audio hissed, then cleared. I heard the clinking of china and the distinctive youthful whine of my sister. Sloane. Ilara is so stubborn. Diana, Sloane snapped, her voice trembling with a mixture of greed and irritation. Why can't she just disappear already? I have creditors calling me every single hour. I need that money to pay off those gambling debts now, not in 6 months. Patience. Child. Diana's voice was like velvet dipped in acid. Julian is doing his part. That breakfast should have sped things up, but her body is fighting back. Once she is out of the picture, Julian will marry Bianca and consolidate the shares. You will receive your 10% of the total assets. Just as we agreed, it is a small price to pay for your silence. 10%. It's not enough for all the lying I've had to do, Sloane muttered, though I could hear her resolve softening at the mention of the money. I had to sit there and listen to her talk about the baby's nursery. It made me want to scream. I sat in the dark cabin of my car, the air suddenly feeling very thin. I thought of the 5 years of university tuition I had paid for Sloane. I thought of the down payment I gave her for her first apartment and the countless times I had bailed her out of emergencies that were actually black holes of debt. It was all garbage. Every hug, every "I love you, big sis," was just a transaction she was waiting to finalize with my blood. I opened my laptop, the blue light illuminating the rage etched into my face. I dug deeper into Julian's private ledgers at Nexus Prime. My fingers flew across the keys, unearthing the rot he had hidden so carefully. He wasn't just greedy, he was desperate. He had lost millions of dollars in unauthorized cryptocurrency trades, using company capital as his personal piggy bank. Nexus Prime was a sinking ship, and I was the insurance policy. They didn't just want the shares. They wanted the $2 million from my life insurance policy. And now, they were salivating over the fake $5 million Swiss inheritance I had dangled in front of Bianca. They were a family of scavengers circling a wounded animal. $2 million for the insurance. $5 million for the trust. I whispered to the empty car, my voice sounding like a stranger's. They aren't even waiting for me to die to divide the spoils. The rain turned into a torrential downpour, blurring the world outside into a gray smear. I looked at the villa one last time, a tomb built on lies. I didn't cry. My tear ducts felt as dry as an old ledger. Instead, a slow, jagged smile spread across my lips. They thought they were the hunters because they were willing to be cruel. They forgot that as an auditor. I don't need to be cruel. I just need to be accurate. I will account for every betrayal, every cent stolen, and every drop of digitalis they tried to force down my throat. The game, it has officially begun, I said, the words tasting like iron and victory. I put the car in gear and pulled away into the storm. I had a lot of work to do before the lawyer arrived at 2 o'clock. If they wanted my life, they would have to pay a price that would bankrupt their very souls. I sat in the dim light of my home office, the blue glow of the monitor reflected in my eyes like a digital frost. To them, I was a dying woman. To the world, I was an auditor. And an auditor's greatest strength isn't just finding the error, it is knowing exactly when to let the interest accumulate before demanding payment in full. I picked up my burner phone and dialed a number I had memorized years ago. Silas Thorne answered on the second ring. He was a former investigator for the Securities and Exchange Commission whose father had been ruined by Julian's father 2 decades ago. He had been waiting for a reason to dismantle the Vance legacy for a long time. "I have the ledgers. Silas," I said, my voice as flat as a ledger sheet. "I need you to verify the offshore trades. Every single penny. I want a paper trail so thick it will take a federal team a year to read through it. Consider it done." "Ilara," Silas replied, his voice raspy with a dark satisfaction. "Are you safe? I am the one holding the pen now," I told him before hanging up. My first move was to protect the only innocent life in this house. I spent the next 3 hours executing a series of complex wire transfers. I moved my entire personal fortune, nearly $1,500,000, into an irrevocable trust. It was anchored by a premier bank in New York and stood in the name of my unborn child. I was the grantor, but I surrendered all individual control to a neutral corporate trustee. Julian and Diana could kill me, but they would never touch a cent of that money. It was gone, vanished into a legal fortress they didn't have the keys to. Next, I began the psychological warfare. I used a masked IP address to send a series of leaked internal memos to Julian's work email. They were carefully crafted forgeries suggesting that the Federal Trade Commission had opened a silent probe into Nexus Prime for racketeering and securities fraud. I knew Julian's ego. He wouldn't check the source immediately. He would panic. He would see his empire crumbling and look for someone to blame. As I finished, the bedroom door opened. Diana entered, her face a mask of counterfeit concern, carrying a glass of her signature green smoothie. "You look so pale." "Ilara, dear," she said, her voice like silk over a razor blade. "You must drink this. It's for the baby's heart." I took the glass, my hand trembling not from the digitalis she thought was in it, but from the effort of not throwing it in her face. I had already replaced her stash of herbal supplements with crushed multivitamins. "Thank you." "Diana," I whispered, letting my eyelids flutter. "I feel so weak. I don't know what I would do without you. And Julian, you don't have to do anything. Darling," she cooed, patting my hand. "Just rest." Once she left, I poured the drink down the drain and focused on my final trap for the day. I prepared an anonymous courier package for Bianca Sterling. Inside was a dossier of doctored photos and fabricated chat logs. It proved that Julian had been siphoning money not for their future, but to flee the country with my sister, Sloane. As soon as the insurance money cleared, I knew Bianca's brand of greed. She wouldn't confront him with logic. She would burn the house down to keep him from leaving her behind. By 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the seeds of suspicion were planted. I could hear Julian pacing in his study, his voice raised in a frantic whisper on the phone. The alliance was beginning to fray at the edges. It was time for the final gathering. I walked into the kitchen and began to prepare a lavish roast lamb. I moved slowly, leaning on the counter to maintain the illusion of my decline. I sent out a group text to Julian, Diana, Bianca, and Sloane. "I want us all to be together tonight," I wrote. "A reconciliation dinner. I have made a decision about the $5 million trust and the power of attorney. Please be here by 7 o'clock tonight." I stood back and looked at the table I had set. 4 chairs for 4 traders. I smoothed the white linen tablecloth, my fingers brushing over the hidden microphone I had taped to the underside. "Dinner is served," I whispered to the empty room. The dining room was bathed in the warm, deceptive glow of candlelight, reflecting off the silver cutlery like polished bone. I sat at the head of the table, my movements slow and deliberate, playing the part of the fading candle. Julian sat to my right, his eyes darting toward his phone every few seconds, his nerves frayed by the fake federal memos I had sent earlier. Diana was to my left, the picture of regal composure, while Bianca and Sloane sat opposite each other, the air between them vibrating with a toxic, unspoken hostility. I took a small, theatrical sip of my water pure, filtered water that I had poured myself from a sealed bottle. I wanted to bring you all here because I know how much you all care about the future of this family, I began, my voice trembling just enough to draw them in. I spent the afternoon with my lawyers, given my declining health. I realized I needed to secure the $5 million trust from Switzerland immediately. But more importantly, I have rewritten my will. If anything should happen to me during childbirth, or sooner, I have decided to name Bianca as the sole legal guardian of my child and the executor of the estate. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum before a storm. Sloane was the first to break. She slammed her glass down, red wine splashing onto the white linen like a fresh wound. Guardian Sloane hissed, her face contorting with a raw, ugly fury. "You have got to be kidding me, Elara. You are going to give everything to this corporate parasite. She is nothing but a gold digger who has been sleeping with your husband behind your back for over a year. She doesn't care about you or that baby. She just wants the keys to the vault." Bianca didn't flinch. She leaned back, a cold, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. "At least I am useful, Sloane." Unlike a pathetic little thief who had to steal $15,000 from Diana's private savings last month just to keep her ex-boyfriend out of jail for his gambling debts. Did you think no one would notice the discrepancy in the ledger? Diana's head snapped toward Sloane, her eyes widening with a predatory sharpness. "You did what you stole from me." "From your own family, she's lying," Sloane screamed, her voice cracking. "Julian! Tell them she's the one who's been skimming from Nexus Prime." Julian stood up, his hands shaking as he tried to exert some form of executive control. "Everyone, just shut up. Elara is ill. We are not doing this here." This was the moment. I leaned toward Julian, sliding my phone across the table so only he could see the screen. It was a fabricated text message, appearing to come from Sloane's number. "I saw you in the kitchen this morning. Julian." The text read, "I know what you put in the eggs. Give me 50% of the insurance payout or I'm calling the police right now." Julian's face went from pale to a sickly, translucent gray. He looked at Sloane as if she were a viper in his bed. You ungrateful little brat," Julian whispered, his voice thick with a murderous rage. "You think you can blackmail me after everything I've done to keep your head above water? I don't know what you're talking about." Sloane shrieked, standing up so fast her chair toppled over. "You're all crazy. You're all trying to frame me." The room dissolved into a battlefield. Bianca stood up to confront Sloane, calling her a worthless addict. Sloane reached across the table, grabbing a handful of Bianca's hair and screaming about the Hermes bag. The refined mask of the Vance family was ripped away, revealing the starving animals underneath. Diana, losing her cool for the first time in decades, stood up and delivered a resounding slap across Sloane's face. "How dare you? I treated you like blood. And you robbed me, Julian." Fueled by the panic of the fake federal probe and the fear of Sloane's supposed blackmail, lunged forward to separate them. But instead, he shoved Bianca hard against the sideboard. The sound of breaking porcelain echoed through the house, a $5,000 vase shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. "Stop it," I cried out, my voice high and thin. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. "Please. I can't breathe. My heart, it's beating too fast." I let my eyes roll back into my head. I didn't just fall. I executed a controlled descent, sliding off the chair and onto the hardwood floor with a dull thud. "Elara." Julian screamed, the terror in his voice genuine now, but only because his $5 million meal ticket was hitting the floor. "Call an ambulance," Diana barked, though she made no move to help me. Through my narrowed eyelids, I saw them hovering over me, a circle of vultures worried that their prey was dying too soon. Julian scooped me up, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and desperation. He carried me toward the door, barking orders at the others to stay put. He didn't know that the ambulance wouldn't be necessary. He didn't know that every word spoken in that room had been recorded and uploaded to a secure cloud. As he rushed me toward the car, I kept my body limp and my eyes closed. The first phase was over. I had divided them. Now, while Julian was trapped in a hospital waiting room under the watchful eyes of the staff I had already alerted, I would begin the final foreclosure on their lives. The sterile white lights of the hospital room felt like a cold embrace. I lay there, watching the rhythmic pulse of the heart monitor, knowing that every beep was a countdown to the destruction of the Vance legacy. Julian sat in the chair beside me, his tailored suit wrinkled, his face a mask of faux exhaustion. He thought he was waiting for me to succumb to the complications. He didn't know that while he was playing the devoted husband in this room, the world he had built on lies was being dismantled by a team of 40 federal agents. I opened my eyes and looked at him. The panic in his gaze was real now, but it wasn't for me. His phone had been vibrating incessantly for the last 20 minutes. "Ilara, thank God you're awake," he whispered, his voice cracking. There is some trouble at the office, some sort of administrative error. The feds are at Nexus Prime. It wasn't an error. Julian," I said, my voice clear and sharp, cutting through the hospital hum like a scalpel. I sat up, the weakness I had projected for weeks vanishing instantly. I sent them the ledgers, the unauthorized crypto trades, the money laundering through the offshore accounts, the 90% discrepancy in the quarterly reports. All of it. Julian's jaw dropped. He reached for his phone, but his fingers were shaking so violently he nearly dropped it. "What are you talking about, Ilara? You are confused. The pregnancy is fine. The digitalis, however, is being processed by the tox lab as we speak," I said, reaching into my bedside drawer and pulling out a thick manila envelope. I tossed it onto his lap. "Those are the divorce papers. I want the apartment, the upstate house, and a settlement of $10 million. I've already moved my personal assets into a trust you can't touch." Julian scrambled to open the envelope, his eyes darting across the legal text. "This is insane. You get nothing. I'll fight this. I have the best lawyers in the city." "You have no lawyers, Julian," I replied coldly, "because you have no money. I made sure the authorities froze every single account tied to you and your mother. As of 10 minutes ago, your personal net worth is exactly $0. And if you don't sign that right now, the recording of you and Diana discussing my disappearance goes directly to the district attorney. You won't be fighting a divorce. You'll be fighting a first-degree murder charge. You wouldn't," he stammered, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I have Bianca. She has the emergency funds. We have a plan." I smiled, and it was the most honest thing I had shown him in years. Bianca is currently in a holding cell at the international airport. She tried to clear security with a pouch of loose diamonds worth nearly $500,000, the same diamonds that were listed as collateral for the Nexus Prime expansion loan. I tipped off the TSA 2 hours ago. Julian collapsed back into the chair, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. And Sloane. Your sister is currently being hunted by the people she owes $300,000 to," I interrupted. "I accidentally let it slip to her primary creditor where she was hiding out at Diana's villa. I imagine they are arriving just about now. Julian's world was a house of cards. And I had just turned on the industrial fans." He looked at me with a mixture of terror and realization. He had married an auditor, and he had forgotten that my job was to ensure that every debt is eventually paid. "Sign it, Julian," I said, handing him a pen. "Or spend the next 30 years wondering how you missed the most obvious discrepancy of your life." His hand trembled as he pressed the pen to the paper. Outside the hospital window, the sun was beginning to set over Aurelia Bay. But for Julian, the darkness was just beginning. He was a man who lived for the optics of power, and now he was nothing but a bankrupt ghost. As he finished signing, a frantic call came through his phone. It was the security firm at Diana's villa. I could hear the faint, distorted screaming of my mother-in-law on the other end. She had just seen the federal seals being placed on her front door. The stress was too much for her brittle heart. The report later would say she suffered a minor stroke, left alone in that massive, empty house after the servants fled when they realized they wouldn't be paid. I took the signed papers from his limp fingers and pressed the call button for the nurse. "The patient is ready to be discharged," I said into the intercom, and my ex-husband was just leaving. Julian didn't even look back as he stumbled out of the room, a man who had finally run out of credit. I stood on the jagged edge of the cliff, the salt spray from the Atlantic stinging my eyes. "Behind me!" The old coastal cabin groaned under the weight of the gale, its weathered wood whispering secrets of the past. I didn't turn around when I heard the crunch of gravel. I knew that sound. It was the heavy, stumbling gait of a man who had lost everything but his capacity for violence. Ilara Julian's voice was a ragged howl, barely audible over the crashing surf. I turned slowly. He looked monstrous. His hair was matted with sweat. His expensive shirt was torn at the shoulder, and his eyes were bloodshot and wild. He had escaped the hospital and the police surveillance, a cornered rat with nowhere left to run. In his hand, he gripped a black semi-automatic pistol, the barrel trembling as he pointed it at my chest. "The code, Ilara. Give me the access code for the Swiss Trust." Now he screamed, his chest heaving with a desperate, frantic energy. $5 million. "It is the only way out. Give it to me, or I swear, I will end this right here." I looked at him, not with fear, but with a cold, clinical contempt that seemed to rattle him more than a scream would have. The wind whipped my hair across my face, but I didn't flinch. I stood tall, the auditor facing a bankrupt ledger. "You still don't get it, do you?" "Julian," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the storm. "You spent your whole life looking for the big score, the easy shortcut. You thought you were so much smarter than everyone else. But you forgot one thing. An auditor doesn't just look for what is there. We look for what is missing. Shut up the code." "Give it to me," he shrieked, stepping closer to the edge of the cliff, the gun shaking in his hand. "I know it exists. Bianca told me. $5 million. I can get away. I can start over." I let out a short, dry laugh that was lost in the wind. "There is no $5 million, Julian. There never was. It was a phantom entry. A line item I created just to see how fast you and your little circle of vultures would start tearing each other apart. The only thing in that Swiss account is a digital copy of a forensic audit report, a report that proves you've been committing securities fraud for over 5 years. It is the document that will ensure you spend the rest of your life in a federal cell." Julian's face went slack, a terrifying mask of disbelief. "No." "You're lying." "You have to be lying." "I don't lie. Julian." "I calculate," I said, stepping toward him, forcing him to keep the gun level. "And I calculated exactly how you would react. I knew you'd come here. I knew you'd bring a weapon. And I knew you'd want to go out like the hero of your own twisted story." I pointed to the small, weathered birdhouse mounted on the side of the cabin, and then to a series of hidden lenses tucked into the crevices of the rocks around us. "Say hello to the world, Julian. You're currently being live-streamed to over 50,000 people. My social media followers, the news networks, and most importantly, the Aurelia Bay Police Department. They've been watching you threaten a pregnant woman for the last 10 minutes. Miles away." I knew Diana was clutching her chest in her darkened villa, and Sloane was staring at her phone in a cheap motel, watching their last hope for a payout evaporate in real time. They were watching the man they had bet their souls on commit professional and legal suicide. Julian looked at the cameras, then back at me, a low, guttural growl building in his throat. Then I'll take you with me. You and that brat. His finger tightened on the trigger. He lunged forward, his face twisted in a final, desperate act of malice. Julian, don't, please, I whispered, giving the audience exactly what they wanted, a moment of vulnerability before the final strike. The sound of sirens erupted from the tree line behind the cabin, blue and red lights slicing through the gray mist. Drop the weapon hands in the air, a voice boomed through a megaphone, amplified by the wind. Julian froze, the barrel of the gun inches from my forehead. He looked at the police, then at the camera, and finally at me. He realized the audit was complete. There were no more hidden assets, no more loopholes. The debt was due. The officers tackled him to the ground just as his knees gave out, as they dragged him away, screaming incoherently about money that didn't exist. I stood alone on the cliff. I breathed in the cold, clean air of the ocean, feeling the life inside me kick for the first time. The noose had finally closed, and for the first time in 10 years, I could finally breathe. 6 months after the nightmare on the cliff, the final gavel fell with the weight of a coffin lid. Julian was sentenced to 30 years in a high-security federal facility for attempted murder, racketeering, and more counts of financial fraud than the court had seen in a decade. I visited him only once, not out of mercy, but to deliver the final entry in his ledger. He looked pathetic in his orange jumpsuit, his skin sallow and his once perfect hair thinning at the temples. The baby. Ilara, how is my son? He whispered, his hands trembling as he pressed them against the scratched plexiglass. Your son, I replied, my voice as cold and sterile as a forensic report. Bianca gave birth 2 weeks ago. I made sure the DNA test was part of the public record for her trial. The child isn't yours. Julian. It belongs to that regional director you tried to bribe last year. You were never the mastermind. You were just her useful idiot. The scream that left his throat was the sound of a man realizing his entire legacy was a vacuum. He collapsed on the floor of the visiting room, sobbing into the linoleum, a bankrupt soul with no more lies to spend. Bianca Sterling didn't escape the fallout either. She was barred from the financial industry for life and handed a 5-year prison sentence for her complicity in the Nexus Prime embezzlement. All her designer bags and the diamonds she tried to smuggle were seized as state evidence. She went from the boardroom to a concrete cell, her beauty fading under the harsh fluorescent lights of justice. Then there was Sloane, my own flesh and blood. She had to sell every designer dress and piece of jewelry I had ever bought her just to settle a fraction of her debts. Last I heard, she was working 12-hour shifts as a janitor, scrubbing the toilets in the very luxury high-rises she used to walk through with her head held high. It was a poetic kind of accounting, cleaning up the messes of others for a few dollars an hour. Diana's end was the most silent. With her assets frozen and her reputation in tatters, she was moved to a state-run nursing home that smelled of industrial bleach and neglected dreams. She died there last month, alone and penniless. Not a single person came to claim her remains. I sent a single white lily to the facility with a card that simply read, "Audit complete." I stood in front of the full-length mirror in our old apartment at Aurelia Bay for the last time. My belly was heavy now, a beautiful, rounded promise of a future I had fought tooth and nail to protect. I looked at the woman in the glass. Her eyes were hard, but they were clear of the fog of betrayal. I was no longer the sheep. I was the one who had balanced the books and found the world wanting. I sold the apartment for $3,200,000. I didn't keep a single penny of the profit for myself. I donated the entire amount to a foundation that provides legal and financial protection for women being systematically erased by the people they love. Then, I packed one suitcase and left that city behind forever. Now, I sit on a quiet stretch of beach in a town where no one knows the name Vance. The morning air is crisp, and the sky is beginning to bleed gold and violet as the sun rises. I have my own blender on the small wooden table next to my chair. I fill it with fresh berries, kale, and cold, clear water. No additives, no digitalis, just life. We're going to be okay, I whisper, feeling a strong, rhythmic kick against my ribs. The debts are paid. We are finally in the black. I watch the sun break over the horizon, a brilliant, blinding light that erases the shadows of the past. Behind me, there is nothing but ash and empty ledgers. Ahead of me, there is only the sea and the absolute freedom of a woman who finally knows her own worth. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal and calculated justice. Please leave a comment below, letting me know where in the world you are listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts on Alara's journey. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and show your support by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by many more people.